We are part of that medium. If you were to see that statement from a newspaper or a public service broadcaster, you would not bat an eye. You would almost accept that that was a given. You expect to see that sort of thing. But with WikiLeaks, it's less obvious and it's less accepted. This is something the scholar Yochai Benkler talks about when he talks about this impression that activism and journalism can exist side by side. What he says here, this is during his testimony to Chelsea Manning's court-martial, he says these are not mutually exclusive. You can have activism and journalism. And when they're activists performing journalism, they are doing journalism. So this is one of the arguments that I'm going to try to show you how we can explore. That when you work outside a newsroom, in the traditional sense, you can still be doing journalism. And part of that involves accepting, acknowledging, embracing the fact that journalism is many things. It's made up of many things. And it may not be that WikiLeaks is out on the beat going to cover town hall, but it is still doing investigative muckraking. And it's still doing investigative journalism and the sorts of things that journalists have long done. So if you take those two arguments, and you just agree with me, at least for the sake of argument, that journalism can also be activism at times, and that activists can do journalism, and if you accept that journalism can be many things, that not all of us are covering traditional news beats, but we're doing things in different ways, we can use that to start unpacking these arguments. There's a second side to that. We have to understand the traditional part. And the traditional part comes when we understand that for fields, for the traditional journalistic field, embracing this conservatism, which is to say journalism wants to be recognizable, it wants to have a coherent sense of what it is, then they will always see Assange as only considering himself a journalist, as not quite one of us. And they'll say the distinction between what the New York Times and the Guardian, for instance, do is they add analysis. They add value to information, to enterprise. WikiLeaks just compiles and distributes information. As for Assange's character, he seems likely not to be well received by an American jury if he ever goes in front of one. This idea that his personality is enough of a reason to say he's not a journalist. I find that to be a slightly weak argument, but one I can understand. And one I can understand because I've been developing frameworks using field theory to try to unpack how these new actors are challenging core understandings of what it is to be a journalist.